This is July the 30th, August the 1st, 1987. And we are at Moyne and Leslie Thurman's house at 1505 North Union in Shawnee, Oklahoma. This is Moyna Taylor Thurman. And Mama, why don't you tell us first about where you were born and where you grew up, and a little bit about how you and Daddy met, and just your life in Shawnee, Oklahoma.
Well, I was born in 800 block, 900 block on 800 block on Beard Street, and then we moved from there over on Broadway when I was about a year old, and lived while my daddy was building the new house. We lived with Grandmother and Grandfather Taylor's big two-story house at 1002 North Broadway, and then we moved over on Park Street when we got through building the new house down in the 500 block on North Park. And I started the school while we were living down there. I started at Irving School, went first year, and then Daddy built another house, and we moved out on 1000 block on Broadway. So then I went to Jefferson School during the second, third, and the fourth grades. And at the end of the fourth grade, just before school was out, we had a bad tornado and it tore our school down, but luckily our principal had dismissed us before school, dismissed the whole school to go home before the tornado hit. He knew it was getting to be real bad, stormy looking. And so we were all were dismissed and got home, so nobody was in the building and got hurt or killed. But they tore our building up, so then we had to finish the school year going down to another school just for a very short time, a couple or 3 weeks, I guess. And
is that the time you saw the tornado when you were standing on the front porch of your house?
The back porch,
What'd you see? What was that like?
Well, the tornado came from the southwest, went northeast, and my mother was having her Shakespeare State Club party that day, and they were just getting ready to serve, and she told me to stay out of the way, and I was standing on the back porch, and the tornado hit, and it started the garage at the back of the lot, turned over, the car was in the garage, it just picked the garage up and turned the garage over and the car upside down back to the back, and a woman behind us over on the next street had laundry on the line and just spilled all the shirts and the sheets and everything, pillowcases and all full of air, and just blew everything all up in the air and all over about that time. Then, probably 3 to 5 bodies went flying through the air that were lived over there by the Catholic Church, and blew them into the grocery store right there on the corner behind us over there. I think we killed 9 people altogether that tornado did, and that was the thing I was telling Trey the other day about. In my book, my desk at school, I had a songbook and had my name in it, of course, and we blew the school all down, ruined the whole school. And 2 or 3 months after the tornado, a man that lives way out about 8 miles northeast of town brought my songbook into the lumberyard and gave it to Daddy because he knew that I was his daughter, you know. He brought my songbook. It had gone clear from Kickapoo and Wallace clear out to about 8 miles northeast of town.
Oh my God.
So that was quite funny. Then the next year, our junior high building was built new, and so they had to have all the Jefferson kids to come down there and start school until they could get the Jefferson School rebuilt to go back there.
So you finished grade school, then what about the rest of school here?
School, and then moved back down to the junior high then, went to school, then moved over to the high school, went to school there.
What'd y'all do for fun in high school here?
Oh, I don't know. Of course,
what about Benson Park?
Well, we went to Benson Park more when I was younger. Church picnics, family picnics, and go out on a streetcar. But after we got up in high school, of course, the streetcars were gone by that time, and we had our own cars. We went out there, but they didn't have much of the same things. By that time, Shawnee had a lot of swimming pools in town, but when I was small, there wasn't any swimming pool except Benson Park.
What about the lake near Broadway Woods?
Well, that was a small lake that was out the end here, city limits, here on Independence and Broadway. And this was the lake out here that weren't any houses around close to it or anything. Not very many people even lived out here in this part of town. Everybody lived south of Independence during at that time. And so that we all come up here and swim in the Broadway lake. And then a lot of the circuses came to Shawnee, came out and pitched their tents and had their circuses all out around the Broadway Lake area out here too.
Wouldn't it freeze in the winter?
Yeah, I'd freeze. Some people do that and I skated on it. I never did skate on it. I skated out at the Elks. Country Club had a lake that would freeze harder than this, but one time when we were probably in high school, a bunch of the boys were out here ice skating, and one fellow that was a little older than we were was a real daredevil, and he had his own car. He is 5 or 6 years older than we were. And he decided he was going to drive that car out on the ice over here at the lake. So he drove his car out on it, and the wheels started going through, and that car started going down the water. He had to have all help push him back out on the ice.
When did you meet Daddy, and when did y'all get married?
I don't even remember meeting Leslie, because he grew up in the end of the 1200 block, and I lived in the 1000 block. So we evidently played together when we were children, the Ford kids. Ruth Boys and Bill Stewart and all of us that lived up and down Broadway in those 3 or 4 blocks played together a lot.
When did y'all start dating?
Oh, junior high, I guess.
And then you...
And
And when did you get married?
we went together off and on during high school, and then we got married when we graduated from high school.
Didn't you all elope?
Yeah.
And then what'd you do after you got married?
Middle of the Depression, we didn't have any money, we couldn't go anywhere. I had signed up to go to a girls' school, but money was such a terrible problem at that time. The dad said he just couldn't afford to send me. I had put an application in at William Woods College up in Missouri, but we decided we'd just get married. And we went to a business college for a year, and both of us took typing and shorthand, and Leslie took bookkeeping and business law. So when we finished that at the end of the school year, he went to work then for that was in 1930. They were taking the census. So he worked for the U.S. government taking the census then for several months then. And then when he got through doing that, they put in the first miniature golf course here in Shawnee. And he got a job working at that at night and put his application in at the Rock Island shops office down here. And he got on down there with the fellow. I'll let him tell you all about that. He did that for maybe 2 years, and then they were moving the Rock Island to Chicago. And he could have gone with them up there, but he didn't want to move to Chicago and live there. So that's when he decided he'd put in a grocery store. So he borrowed $500 from his dad, and we rented a little wooden store, frame store, out here on the corner of Vera and Independence. And put the grocery store in there. I don't know how long we were over there in that store. I'll have to tell you that too. Then he bought the lot across the street from there and tore the house down and built the brick store building over there. We were there altogether, it was almost 48 years on that one corner. And then after we'd been there about 10 years, the store was not large enough, so he enlarged it nearly twice the size it was.
Okay, tell some about your mother and daddy and where they came from and how they got to Oklahoma.
My dad was born in Kansas. Mother was born in Texas, Butte Vista, Texas. And Daddy's mother and daddy had met. She was teaching school up in Kansas, close to St. Joe. Kansas, I believe it was. And he had been in the Army and was captured, and when he was dismissed and let go at the end of the war,
Now, which war was that?
Oh, well,
Would that be World War One or the
no,
Civil War?
before that, let's see, I should let me have the thing I had written
Is
down
that
there.
you're talking about?
Anyway, he was let out as a prisoner of war. He kind of liked the area around there, so he moved into this area where she was teaching school, and they met and fell in love, and got married, and so they went out from the edge of town, and I had some thing I could tell you exactly where it is, but anyway, he bought, honey, don't do that, you can get the thing out of whack. Moving the hands off, don't move the hands around, that you get the whole thing out of whack. It'll jump then, you won't keep right time. Anyway, they bought an acreage and had a farm there.
Now, where is this?
Well,
No, in Kansas or?
yeah,
in-
it's in Kansas,
okay.
but I've got it written down. You let me go get that. I'll turn it off and let me go get it.
No,
There.
go ahead.
And they lived up there, and they had 5 sons born while they were living up there. And oh, it was hard life. They worked real hard and lost several crops. And one winter it got way damn cold. And grandmother, of course, they had a terrible time keeping warm and making crops and feeding animals that they had, cattle and horses. So she said she'd had it. She didn't want to go someplace where it was warm. So I don't know how they happened to pick San Marcos, Texas, but that's where they ended up. They moved down there. Grandmother and granddaddy and the 5 boys moved to San Marcos, Texas. And he put in a kind of a general mercantile store, grocery store, sold other stuff too. Lived down there, and then he had 3 sisters born after they moved down there too then. But my mother was living in San Marcos, and so he met her. They fell in love, and after he moved to San Marcos, he finished high school, he went to a business college down there and took bookkeeping and all everything. So then he went to an uncle and aunt in Kansas City and lived with them and worked in his lumberyard up there for a long time. Not a long time, about 3 years, 2 or 3 years. And after he learned the business and all, his uncle decided he knew enough about the business, he could go in business for himself. And he had been to Oklahoma City, and he thought Shawnee was one of the upcoming places here, and discussed then, that was before state had discussed then, that maybe Shawnee would be the capital of Oklahoma. So he suggested that Daddy would come to Shawnee and put in a lumberyard. So Daddy came on to Shawnee and put in the lumberyard, and it went so well, and business was so good. So then he had his family, his mother and his dad and his 3 sisters and 3 of his brothers to come on and move to Shawnee, and he worked in the lumberyard with my dad a little bit, but he was not well by that time, and he retired. He had sold his grocery store, mercantile store out. So he worked, and then 2 of the brothers worked in the lumberyard with Daddy. So all the Taylor family lived around here until they all married, moved away, or died.
What was it that happened to his lumberyard?
Well, of course,
Did it burn down?
first big thing happened in 1943, I guess it was. The lumberyard burned clear to the ground, and he had to move the business. He had a planing mill about 2 blocks away, so he just moved the business up there, and it was a smaller place, so the business was very small from then on. But until he died, well, they had pretty good business, but of course during the Depression it went down a whole lot. But
And what about your mother's family?
well, Mother was born away in Buena Vista, Texas. I don't know how far that was from San Marcos, but my mother's dad was a gentleman farmer, I guess you'd call him, and he owned a whole lot of farmland all around part of Texas. And he liked San Marcos so well, and he built a beautiful big 2-story home way up on the top of a mountain in San Marcos there. And he owned a whole lot of bottom land all around the rivers up there. Grew a lot of cotton and just he made real good money down there. Raised all their children up there in that great big house up on top of the hill. It was more fun when I went down there. They had a great big tank up there, and he had goldfish in the tank, and he just used the tank for watering his horses, and he had 2 or 3 cows there. And he'd let us kids go swimming in that tank sometime up there. But, oh, I had a lot of fun up there, and they had a great big cistern. Of course, they didn't have it, I guess, maybe they had a well, I don't remember that, but to catch all the rainwater, they had the gutters running all around the house, and every time it rained, the gutters went down and put all this rainwater in the cistern. And of course, I can remember all the girls in the family always washed their hair in that fresh, unpolluted rainwater. That was the best thing you could do. And they had a great big veranda going all around the whole house. Porch furniture all around, and everybody, of course, women all would go out and sit on the veranda when it's cool part of the morning. And sometimes they'd go to town, but not as much because they just had horses and buggies early, you see. And if the grandfather wasn't around to take them, why they had they had 4 or 5 colored men and several Mexicans that worked there on the place. So they'd drive the big buggy with 2 horses to take grandmother and some of us to town once in a while. But after my grandfather died and the rest of the children were married and moved away, there were just 2 sisters that never been married that were left with grandmother. So they sold that big home. They moved down closer to town, and one of my aunts put in a hat shop downtown on the square, and the other sister stayed home and took care of my grandmother, and they lived there till grandmother died, and then they fixed the house up into an apartment house and rented out 2 apartments out of it. So the 2 sisters lived there till they died. So that was the last
Do you
place.
know, what about did you ever know your great-grandparents? None of them? Do you know where they were from?
I can't tell you without getting some more materials written up. I've forgotten where they were and where they lived.
As children, Betty and Bill and I called your mother and daddy Nana and Grangy. Tell us just a little bit what they were like as people.
Oh, it's hard to describe. Both of them were wonderful Christian people, and Daddy was a hard worker, and Mother was excellent early day housekeeper and cook and all, and she made a very nice home for all of us growing up. We had a lot of company, and she had a Negro woman that helped with the house, but she had to do a lot of work. But early days, she'd have to go out and get the chicken out of the chicken coop, and wring its neck, kill it, and then pick the feathers, and dress that chicken, and then bring it in and fry it, and have ice cream. She'd have to make the custard and everything up for the ice cream, and then hand freeze, turn the crank all the time. Daddy would be there sometime to do it, but not often. But she worked real hard. She used to sew and make my clothes when I was real little. And of course, we had a very good life. Daddy provided real good for us. And since he was in the lumber business, why, he built a lot of new homes. It was a joke in town about, I think when they'd been married 28 years, they'd lived in 24 different houses, because every time a new plan book came out, or a new book that had new house plans and new hardware, he'd sell the house we were living in and build another one. And he just loved to build a house and move. It's a brand new house. So,
Did your mom mind doing that?
no, she didn't right at first, but one time I remember he sold a house that we were living in, and they had to rent a place to move into while he was building another new one. And so we just barely got that one finished. moved in, this other one that was over in Jefferson Terrace, and they had to have two moving vans to move our furniture, and they just unpacked all the first van, or started to unload the second one, when Daddy came driving up, and he said, well, don't worry about placing the furniture, I just sold this house. And I thought Mother was going to walk off and leave him about that time. So we had to go rent another house and move until he got another one built. We were living in a rent house until he got the next one built. And she said, don't you ever sell it out from under me again. So they didn't move too many times after that. I can't remember, about two or three times after that. But
You said your mom was in a study club. Did she read a lot? And
she read quite a bit. Of course, the one study club she belonged to, they had books they had to study and had to really work just like going to school. But the other one, she didn't have to do that much. It was a Shakespeare study club, and once each year, each one of them had to review a Shakespeare play. But she read quite a bit too.
had she gone to school?
Yeah, she went 2 years to a girls' school in Roanoke, Virginia. Then she came back to San Marcos, got her degree from the State Teachers College there in San Marcos.
Did she teach any after she finished school?
No, she didn't teach any.
Okay.
No, they traveled some, the family traveled some and all, but she never did teach.
What about Grangy? Wasn't he one of the founders or people responsible for getting OBU started in First Baptist Church here?
He was on the board when they started talking about the Southern Baptist Convention about having college here, and so they all worked real hard on getting the land and getting the money together to pay for the land and getting the OBU started. So after they decided, then they go on and build it here and all. They wanted to start, and they had just a few that wanted to enroll, but they had no building to meet in, so they had classes. For the first 2 years, I believe it was, at OBU, they had the classes to meet in the First Baptist Church downtown here in Shawnee. But Daddy was, secretary of the Board of Trustees, the Board of Trustees for, 25 years maybe. Long, long time anyway.
But then he was a charter member of the church here too, wasn't he?
No. The church was already organized. No, he was here, and when they started to build this church they're in now, they had met in 2 other locations before they ever built this church here. But he was a long-time member, and then he was on the board there, and he was on the chairman of the Board of Deacons, and he was BYPU director, and he was on a lot of different things there. Taught Sunday school classes. BYPU, that's Baptist Young People's Training Program, now we call it Training Union. But
tell us about your grandparents. What you remember about your grandparents on both sides.
I don't remember much about either grandfather. My grandfather Taylor came to Shawnee, and of course he died when I was about 5 years old. And I don't remember, he wasn't well then, and I don't remember too much about him because he wasn't well, and he didn't, we were around him a lot too, but we'd go to their house to eat, but I know he always had to get up and go back to their bedroom and rest for a while all the time, so I really didn't know him that much.
What about your grandmother, Taylor? What do you remember about her?
She was a vivacious woman, hard worker. You gonna answer that for me? And she raised all of her family, and then she had a grandson. His mother had died in childbirth. She raised him for me.
Okay, finish telling about Grandmother Taylor now.
Yeah, like I said, she was a vivacious character, and she was a hard worker. She was a real good Christian woman, worked a lot in the church. But one thing I do remember her telling me after I got married and had Betty and Barbara, I remember her saying, now Moyna, your children come first, and don't try to do too much in church work, Sunday school, women's organizations or anything. because after your children are grown, you can spend more time doing that, but stay there and stay with your children and not do too much of that while your family's young. And she was always giving me advice. Maybe it went in one ear and out the other when I was younger, but I remember it over 30 years, things like that she would tell me. But she was a marvelous cook. Oh, she was a good cook. And so then after grandfather died, why, they had lived in a great big two-story home down by the lumberyard, but after he died, she moved out on, built a smaller house out on 1004 North Broadway. Grandfather and Daddy had bought a bunch of land out there in the 1000 block on Broadway, and so they they built the first house that came to show this big two-story house. Then they sold that when all the children got married and left home, and they moved down close to the lumberyard. They would cross the street there for a short time while he decided what to do. In the meantime, he got sick and died. So she went ahead and built a house out on Broadway at 1004 next door to where the other big two-story house was in. And so she lived there for a long, long time. And after the grandson got older and he left, she said that house was too big, so she moved into a smaller rent house for a short time. And she fell and broke her arm, collarbone. And so she came and lived with Mother and Daddy. And they took care of her for about a year, and then finally the daughter that lived in McAllister thought she better come down there, so she went down and lived with her then until she died. So, but she was a very, very strong character. She was really a wonderful woman.
Okay, what about your grandmother on your mother's side?
My mother said, well, of course, I didn't know her as well because she lived in San Marcos, and she never did come up here to visit us in Oklahoma. Mother's sisters came a lot of times, but grandmother never did. After her husband died, I bet she and the two daughters that never did marry lived together, and we'd go down there and see them a lot, but her health was getting kind of bad at the time I remembered after older, and she was having trouble with memory and all. So I wasn't as impressed with her as I was with grandmother Taylor, but she was a wonderful woman. But she was a southern lady kind of, and she had a lot of help and took care of the household and the cooking and the washing and ironing. She didn't do a whole lot of work. She was a southern lady, really, and but she was a real sweet, gentle person, and she was a good Christian woman. But I just wasn't around them enough. Mother and I go down and stay a month maybe in the summer, and then sometimes we'd go back down and stay a couple of weeks around Christmas time. But I really wasn't around them very much. But we did have a good time when we were kids to go down there because both grandmother King and grandfather King owned a lot of land, like I said, and she and her sister family built two great big summer homes on the river. And I was quite small, and they'd all move out of town and go down and live in these lovely cabin things on the river. And then the men would come out and spend the night, and they had a lot of help, Negro help or Mexican help that did all the work. And all the kids would swim in the river there, and we just had the best time. That was a real happy memory going down there. But after grandmother died, we didn't go as often. I got older, we never did go as much then.
Well, my mother Moyna won't tell this about herself, but I will say she has been active all of her life and all that all of us kids have done, and PTA president for more years than I can remember. She has practically run First Baptist Church here and has recently received a wonderful honor and plaque and award for her many years of work down at the church, and has built up a ministry to prepare food for families of people that have died. Mother and Daddy have been active in the country club and social organizations here. Mother's still in the Shakespeare club that her mother had been in years ago. Has played bridge probably more hours than we can both add up together in her younger years, not so much recently, but is probably one of the better bridge players in this part of the country. And this is still August the 1st, 1987, and this is Leslie Thurman, my daddy, Trey and Tracy's granddaddy, and he's going to first tell us a little about where he was born and what it was like growing up in Shawnee, Oklahoma, and a little about what he was like as a kid.
Well, it's been so long, it's hard for me to remember a lot of it. But I was born at Tenney Severn, which is the north part of Shawnee, and kind of established myself as a little bit of a daredevil type young person. I always had a lot of appreciation of nature, wildlife. We had a pretty close-knit neighborhood group, and I was always the one that they would shove things on to do that nobody else would do, it seemed. I had problems getting home from school. I went up to Rose Garden School. That's 5 or 6 blocks north of our home. And so much of the time I would want to stop along the way and play. And frequently, when I would come home from school, I'd be maybe 30 minutes late. And at that point in time, we had a hen house out back of our home, and there was a little peach tree that grew there. And quite frequently, my mother would beat me with a little limb off of that peach tree and switch my bare legs as I came on up to the backyard. And of course, she always told me that God put that little peach tree there just for that purpose. And it was hard for me on a continuing basis to get to where I would just come right straight home from school, but I finally did. A number of us in the neighborhood had ponies. And Bill Stewart was our closest neighbor. They had a pony, and they had a cow. We never did have a cow. We had chickens. And Bill's father, Mr. Stewart, it wasn't uncommon that I would go across the fence there at milking time, and we kids would stand back off. They had a big Jersey cow, and we kids would stand back off and open our mouths, and he would take the udder of the cow, and he'd squirt milk across here into our mouths. That's what he did. It was kind of fun. As things progressed, why, there was a fellow named Darrell Roothouse, whose grandfather lived with him. He was quite a tobacconist. And every time any one of us would skin ourselves or get little places on our skin, why, Mr. Corbin would take his finger and he'd stick it up in his mouth and get that tobacco, chewing tobacco liquid on her, and he'd rub it on wherever we skinned ourselves. He said that would cauterize it and make us get well quick. My first grade teacher's name up at Rose Garden was a Mrs. Broadus. And she was quite a favorite of mine, and apparently I was of hers. Accused me of being the teacher's pet. My mother always sent me to school pretty clean. She was pretty strong on white shirts. And Mrs. Broadus thought that was quite noticeable. My first grade school favorite girl, as best I remember, his name was Virginia Coker. And I had a crush on her for a while. And then another girl came along that I thought was a little nicer and a little prettier, and her name Madeline Courtney. And even back that far back, Trey, I had girls. I don't know, have you got a kind of favorite girl now? No. Well, I did. Well, you're not. Well, that's the way it was.
What was the deal? Didn't your grandmother worry that you would never live to be an adult? What was the deal about that?
Oh, well, yes. My parents both having originated in Grandview, Indiana, and when I went back there, at a point in time of probably 6 or 7 years old, they had a big hay barn, and I proceeded to crawl up in the wall, got up on a cross beam, and was going to dive into the hay, thinking it'd be fun. But the hay was fluffed up a bit. It wasn't as solid as it looked, and I went right through the hay to the floor and hit on the back of my neck. And of course, my uncle was down below, and he heard me let out a holler and start to cry. And so my grandmother, who was my dad's mother, made the statement rather firmly that I would never live to be an adult. And that sort of made my mother mad. My mother didn't like to hear that. In another occasion, I would get out and ride a horse that paralleled a road that ran by their place. And of course, cars back there then didn't run quite so fast. They ran faster than most horses, but I'd get up on the corner of the fence, in the corner of the pasture by the fence row, and see a car coming, and I'd try to beat it to the end of the fence on the other end. Of course, my grandmother saw me doing that, and she liked it, had a fit about it. One time, we were in the backyard there at Dad's old home place, my grandmother's, and they had a big black pot out in the back, boiling cloves and stirring them with a stick, and the snake showed up. Either my grandmother or one of my aunts grabbed the snake and threw it over into the fire that was under the pot of boiling cloves. Well, of course, I just couldn't stand that, so I rushed over and grabbed the snake out of the fire and threw him out. So then my grandmother then said again, she wondered if I had good sense. Oh, my.
Now, you went ahead and went to school all through junior high and high school?
Went through grade school, junior high, and high school right here in Shawnee, Oklahoma.
Weren't you a pretty big...
Played in high school football and was in high school track. Of course, we didn't have organized track back there then. In grade school, we did have a little track program, but nothing like since. And then I had a year of business college after that, and then continued on and went to work for the Rock Island Railroad for 1 year in a clerical position. Had learned a little shorthand, a little bookkeeping. My dad had been a traveling salesman for many years and called on grocery stores, and I, on a continuing basis, had gone by a little grocery store up just north of us. I've been there all the time. That's where I got my all-day suckers and what have you. So I took a notion that I was going to get in the grocery business. This building became vacant, and so I have saved $750 in working for the Rock Island Railroad, and I borrowed $750 from my dad, and that's what I went into the grocery business, $1,500. Now then, nowadays you couldn't buy an order of meat for that. That's the difference, the way things are and the way they were.
Now, your first store was across the street from where it ended up, wasn't it? And
Yes,
then...
a man by the name of Heichelbach owned the building, the little building that I started out in. I just rented it from him by the month. Later, took a lease and leased, I think, on a 5-year lease basis. Because as I progressed, and business got better, and I worked more hours. I wanted a larger building, needed a larger building, and I tried to buy that property from him, and he didn't want to sell it, wouldn't sell it, and so tried to get him to enlarge the building, and he wouldn't, and not having any amount of capital at the time, then I proposed to another fellow to just go for it, to build a store across the street on a bigger lot, and after having made enough payments on that building, it was about a 5,000 square foot building, and we later made it to, after we had bought the building from him, after having made payments sufficient to pay off what he had spent building the structure, so then we finally, after having bought it, we made it into a structure about 6,500, 7,000 square feet.
At one time you had several other stores around, didn't
Well,
you?
yes, there's something kind of interesting about this first location we bought. Might be interesting. The man could see that apparently we were getting along pretty well, so when we tried to buy the building, he wanted to charge us a lot more for it than it was worth. And of course, I was willing to pay more than anybody else anyway, because I was in it and doing a good business and making money. And so, last resort, I bought the corner south across the street from there, which was a vacant corner, 75 to 150, and I put a bulldozer over there, and I was going to dress that property off and build my own building over there. And in the course of negotiating, he came to terms, and so I bought the building that I was in and bought it for what it was worth. After being in several years, matter of fact, the store that we're talking about, our bread and butter store, so to speak, we operated for 46 years, I believe. In that interim of time, I forget what year particularly, we started going into multi-store operation. We acquired what was known here as the Public Market as our first store. Then we acquired a store out on East Main, had a store at Seminole, store at Wewoka, store at Cloud, Midwest City. Had some 7 or 8 stores for a few years. And that's when I usually would meet myself coming back. On the day of that proposition. And I've always thanked the man upstairs that I didn't lose my health in the course of the hours that I put in, and I didn't go broke. I didn't make a whole lot of money, but I paid everybody off, and it was good to me. I was good to it. That's the way it was.
Okay, Daddy, tell us some about, now as children, we called Daddy's parents Grangy Grace and Grangy Forrest.
That's right.
And so Dad's going to tell us now a little bit about Grangy Grace and Grangy Forrest and how they came to Oklahoma and where they were from and what they did and a little bit about what they were like.
Both mother and dad were born in quite a small town, Grandview, Indiana, which was right on the town itself proper. It was right on the Ohio River. And there, my dad's home place was about a mile from the river, and a rather large farm. My mother was born in town there, and of course they both grew up there. My mother's parents were deceased rather early in her childhood, and she was raised by an uncle and an aunt, not the same aunt and uncle, but at different times. She was moved around quite a little. Her early life was pretty tough. After coming through school, why she managed to, an uncle who was a doctor sent her to a teaching school in Terre Haute, Indiana. In my dad's case, he was raised on the farm, and as a young fella, he grew up there, several brothers and sisters, and he, in the earlier years, showed favoritism to fishing and hunting and all, and one of the worst experiences anyone could have as probably a young fella around 14, 15 years old. His buddy laid a shotgun up against the fence row and fell and shot him and killed him. So after that, my dad lost interest pretty much in that kind of activity. Had to go in and tell the boy's mother that the boy was dead down in the field. Dad went on and came up through the ranks, and by the same token went to school in Terre Haute, Indiana. And I guess I failed to mention, but both Mom and Dad taught school for a while.
What did your mom teach? Do you remember?
Honey, I couldn't tell you for sure. Of course, Marilyn and Vera probably can. Of course, I did forget to mention before this, my dad some way had read or learned quite a bit about Oklahoma, the beginning of Oklahoma, and he had come here when he was quite young, somewhere between 14 and 16, with an older young fella. I don't know how he talked his parents into letting him come, but he did. And he first went over to Lawton, where they had the run, what they call the Oklahoma Run, and he didn't participate in it at all, but to make a long story short, of course, he went on back to Indiana, and then after having his schooling, why he taught school, I don't know for how many years, and then always in his mind thinking he wanted to come back to Oklahoma, which he did then. Came back and worked for a firm in Lawton for a short time, moved to Oklahoma City and worked there for quite a while. And in that interim of time, of course, he went back to Indiana, and he and Mother married, and she agreed to come with him to Oklahoma. So, of course, when she came here, they both came here to Shawnee. And, had a real good, long married life together. They were genuinely modest people.
Now, your dad, in his business, didn't he have to travel around by train on his sales route?
Dad was a traveling salesman after having kept books for a firm for a while. And of course, in the earlier years, then they would ride what was called a local train, a little puddle jumper train in smaller towns, and then they would transfer it to a buggy and maybe go to a town that was 4 or 5 miles from where the train wasn't, or 6 or 8 or whatever, by buggy or wagon. And my dad was one of the earlier fellas to buy a Model T Ford in this country, and then he would have other salesmen ride with him and pay him a modest amount to go with him. And it used to be that when he would be working, I believe the furthest point he ever worked mileage-wise was Okemah, Oklahoma, and which now takes about 45 minutes to get there by car. Then it was an overnight trip. When he went to Okemah, he spent the night there.
How would you describe your dad and mother just as people?
Well, I just mentioned the fact, honey, that they were quite modest people. And certainly very sincere, and of course, as with we children, we just never, we didn't have a lot of fussing and going on around our house. We just didn't do it. Mom and Dad never talked about dying. They talked about the more flimsy things. We were, as kids growing up, we always had plenty to eat and good clean clothes and a clean place to live. Most of our neighbors got an electric icebox before we did, and they got a radio before we did, and they got this and they got that before we did. But whenever we got something of any significance that way, why, we had, my dad had a program, we saved the money for a specific item, and when we got the money, we bought it. We didn't buy it and pay so much down and so much a month. Of course, that was hard for us kids to understand why it had to be that way, but that's the way it was. Then in later years, when we saw a lot of these people who had gone the other route, where they lost their homes and this and that, you know, when the hard times came, some of them, then we better understood why my dad had outlined his route the way he did. We, years ago, my dad would get lots of dandy premiums, nice things, from things that he sold. In other words, in the wholesale produce business then, they handled chewing gum, and they handled candy bars, and they handled a lot of cigars and other lines than fresh produce, and a lot of those people gave premiums by selling certain quantities of those items. And of course, we always, Dad would talk about we were going to get I don't know whether he got a piano one time that way or not, but he got some pretty big items.
Isn't that lamp, the naked lady lamp with that globe on it?
No,
one of those things?
I forgot to make mention about the fact that that was the first thing I ever bought my mom of any significance.
Oh, okay.
And I used to, as a young person, mowed lots of lawns with the old hand-type reel mower. I forgot to blend that in. Lawns that I cut for 50, 75 cents on the dollar, while the young fellas doing that now get $15, $20 for doing. But that was just a difference in values. But I bought that lamp. That was the first thing of any significance I ever bought, I guess.
Would your folks, were they always Methodist and active in the Methodist
Always
church?
Methodist, yes.
Even back in Indiana, I wonder?
Yes.
All the way.
Yes. Ours was known as the North Methodist Church in the beginning here. There was the North Methodist and the South Methodist.
Then that's what later became Wesley Methodist here?
That's right. That's correct.
What do you remember about your dad's parents? Did you know?
Well, of course, I never saw my grandfather.
Okay.
But of course, I loved my grandmother, and actually, being that far separated, why, I saw her very minimal of time through the years. Never actually really learned to know her like kids would now, where they see them, 2 or 3 times a year, that sort of thing. Because I actually didn't see my grandmother probably over 6 or 8 times in her lifetime.
Yeah. Well, but did she still live in your dad's old home place back in Indiana, and that's where y'all would go visit?
That's where we went to visit. Of course, that's where she passed away. She had a son, our favorite uncle, Cal, and an aunt, Aunt Aries, who never married, and they lived there with her until she died.
Do you know what your grandfather used to do for a living?
Farmer.
He was a farmer there?
Farmer.
Yeah. What about your mom's folks? I know they died early. Do you know what her dad had done?
Honey, I don't just right off the tip of my head.
Wasn't he
Of course, I did know
Yeah.
that some, well, you'll have to ask Vera that. She maybe could put you on certainly. Marilyn could, but I just knew so little about Mother's parents. She frequently would talk about one favorite aunt that she had that had done so much for her and that she loved so dearly. And then there was as I mentioned earlier, a doctor who was an uncle that did a lot for her. Really, I just can't tell you that much.
Okay, well, we're going to sign off. Okay.
Two little things that Barbara thought that she should put on this film that I told her about. One was, as a youngster, there was a creek that was about a block from our house that used to have a lot of crawdads. As a youngster, I ran my arm down many a crawdad hole and pulled them out. Some of them were great big suckers, and so I would have cut places on my fingers, and we would finally got around to where we would dress them out, peel their tails, and we fried them down in the woods close to our house, and they were good to eat. And finally talked my mother into where she would let me bring them, and she'd cook them there at the house. That was one little thing we forgot about.
Now, that creek, isn't that what's left, the little creek that runs through the Broadway woods?
Yes.
It was just bigger in those
Yes.
days, yeah.
Very true. Very true. Same creek. Which had drained off of the old Broadway lake. Yeah, great time. Great time. Then another little incident that Barbara thought we should make mention of. I don't remember how old I was, but of course I was a little older by this time. But the boys had heard about concocting a homemade cannon at the 4th of July time, and so we got a piece of pipe and cut a groove in it and stuffed it full of wadding and gunpowder. We didn't furnish the gunpowder, but somebody did, and up by Fleck Ford's and Merle Carr's house, we got it all set up and put it up against a curb there, and then it was a matter of who was going to discharge it. We rigged up some kind of a fuse. So it was, like I say, the daredevil Thurman volunteered to do it finally, and so when I struck a match to that thing, it was just like I was lucky I didn't kill myself or kill somebody else, to be honest with you. The thing went off and made such a terrible blast, and it blinded me at first and deafened me. And of course I knew I wasn't dead, but then I was afraid. I was scared. And the first thing I could hear, when I could finally hear after this, was Lloyd Boyd Jr. laughing. And that made me a little bit mad. Of course, Lloyd was famous for laughing anyway, though. And luckily, all I wound up having trouble from that was a few powder burns and powder speckles in the skin.
Okay, do you have any final, if you had to say what you thought was kind of a theme of your life or what you think is most important, what would you say?
Oh, honey, life has been so precious to me, everything about it. Probably the most troubled I am is how fast it has all gone by, and having the realization that at the time I was probably the most monetarily ambitious, that I wouldn't have spent more time with my kids than I did, but I had my nose to the grindstone. But life as a whole has been wonderful as far as I'm concerned. That's what I feel about it.
Kind of your happiest times are usually out on water and on a lake and catching fish at every cast.
For one reason or another, I have to admit that fishing is the finest therapy that I found in all my endeavors. So sometimes I'm out on the lake, I talk to God. Talk to Him.
This is Vera Thurman Jones. It's August the 1st, 1987, and we're sitting here in her room, and she's going to tell a little bit about when she went away to college at OSU and kind of what she did after that. What did you study at OSU, Auntie Vera?
I was a home ec major, and then of course when I started teaching, I taught speech, I taught grammar. To this day, when anybody says you start in butchering the English language, it just goes all over me.
Where all did you teach?
I taught at first year we were married. In fact, we couldn't even have gotten married if I hadn't had a job. Herb lost his first $300 that he'd saved, and he was just out of his mind. He wanted to get married, and yet he couldn't get married because he didn't have a nickel. He didn't have even a wooden nickel.
Well, where did y'all live when you first got married?
Oh, we lived in an interesting place. We lived in a big 2-story house and had the upper whole, the upper part of the house.
Was that in Shawnee or Oklahoma City?
It was in Oklahoma City.
Okay, but you taught at Bethel before that. Were y'all not married then yet?
Well, I didn't teach till I was married.
Okay. So you taught though in Bethel, and then did you teach in Oklahoma City too?
Let's see here. I
Can't remember. Okay. Tell me a little bit about your mom, where she was from and what she was like. Where did she grow up?
She grew up, of course, in Grandview, Indiana, which was a small town on the Ohio River. And grew up, of course, she had several relatives, and I think she felt quite left out. And of course, when she and Daddy got married, that's for the first time she had a family. Or she just had,
She had several aunts and uncles that raised her, didn't she?
her grandfather paid a lot for her schooling. That is what would now be a junior college, I think.
Didn't she have several chances to get married before she married Forrest Thurman?
Yes, she did.
Seems like, did she almost marry a preacher or somebody?
I don't know, she taught a Sunday school class, a young man's Sunday school class.
Is that where she met Grandview Forrest?
I don't know.
Seems like he was in that class, and that's how she
I
met
don't
him.
know whether he was in that class or not. Of course, he had written her a note, and it was very formal. Daddy was from a family where they didn't even believe in having a deck of cards
Oh, really?
around.
Were they Methodist?
I don't know. They were, my Aunt Harry grew, she just loved to grow flowers, and of course she and Herbie just got along beautiful.
Mhm.
And this
Is that right? Aunt Erie was Grangy Forrest's sister.
Yeah, he had two sisters, Daisy and what was the other name?
And Aunt Erie.
Yeah, Daisy and Erie. Thank golly, they didn't name me Erie.
That is kind of a classy name, isn't it? Well, what do you remember about your daddy's mother?
I thought my mother and daddy could do just about anything. I mean, when I found out that, something about the facts of life, and I said, well, I knew one thing. I was sure of it. That my mom and daddy didn't go and have a sexual relationship and all that stuff. They just didn't do that kind of thing. I was just, and I ran all the way home from school, and I ran all the way home from school, and I ran out there running the Santa Claus. They told me that there was, and I figured that if they told me, that's the way it was. And Mama didn't sit down and tell me a whole bunch of stuff. I knew that I want nice girls, what we call them, just nice girls, didn't participate in doing, running around.
Okay, now what about your dad's mom? I think she was the only grandparent that you really knew. What was she like?
I didn't like her.
You didn't? How come?
Because she said Leslie was, I didn't like her because she didn't like Leslie. She didn't have good sense. They threw a snake in a fire. And the snake wiggled. And Leslie thought it was still alive, and it just broke his heart. And of course my grandmother was so, and to that, she slapped Aunt Erie. Aunt Erie did everything for her that you could think of. She slapped Aunt Erie.
Oh my. Well, did she continue to live on the farm after Grangy Forrest's dad died?
Said what?
Did she continue to live on the home place in Indiana by herself after Mr. Thurman died?
No. She, Aunt Erie was still there, and Uncle Pal was still there.
Oh, that's right. They lived there with her, didn't they? See.
Mother needed to go to town, which wasn't often. She would go on the streetcar, and she'd take her list and go and do her shopping, and if I wanted something so bad, she'd call and hadn't gotten it, and she'd call up. We knew the clerks by name, so she'd call up and say, Vera just has to have that hat. I was a hat person. Grace, finally later on told that she said if anybody asks about me, just tell them that I'm the woman with a hat on. Most everybody had, by that time, had quit wearing hats, and hats did so much for me before I had to wear glasses. And Daddy, Mama did the discipline, but Daddy would say, I think that she'd say, Grace, call Vera in. We'd be sitting out in front. And so Mama would call me, and I'd go trotting in. You didn't sit out in front. Do any courting now. But I was so fortunate. I mean, they loved me, and one thing I do remember was that several of my close friends had both their mother and their father, and I felt my folks were older than the rest of the girls. They had younger parents. You know, so I stayed with them. And if we wanted to do anything and Daddy didn't know whether that was the right thing to do or not, we had, we first, Mama talked to us and said, well, I guess we better not do that. And so I guess I had very uneventful. It wasn't anything outstanding.
Okay, you and Herb lived in Oklahoma City really all the years of your married life, didn't you?
40 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
And where was it that Herbie taught?
He taught at Bethel, and then he taught in Oklahoma City too.
What all did he teach?
And he taught, it was partially government subsidized, and but he had self-discipline for the children. And I don't know that I have known any other teacher. He didn't. They corrected each other. If one boy heard another one cussing and saying bad words, why, he got to do the paddling. So many licks for this, so many licks. But it worked beautifully.
And didn't Herb teach horticulture? Is that what he was teaching in high school?
He taught biology. Of course, he loved flowers.